Well, I'm State Senator Joe Markley here at the Capitol, where the Senate has just adjourned after what I have to say is the most dramatic day I have ever witnessed as a state senator in my 9 sessions up here. And I would say the happiest day I have had in the 7 years that I've been back up here. So let me tell you a little bit about it. Yesterday, may I say, was the most futile day I spent in the Senate. Both chambers were called up here, 187 legislators. Neither chamber went into session all day long. We just hung around. Well, down in the House, they tried to line up the votes to pass the Democratic budget. That effort failed. We went home late at night, got up reasonably early this morning to come back up here. Driving up here, I was thinking, this is going to be my worst day as a legislator, because I figured either nothing would happen for the second straight day, or we'd pass a Democratic budget that includes $1.5 billion in new taxes. What happened instead was a surprise, I think, to almost everybody in the building. So to explain the procedure, we went into session probably somewhere around 2:30 or 3 o'clock. And after voting on the bill concerning Millstone, the nuclear power plant, which was a relatively brief piece of business, we moved on to the budget. The Democrats presented their budget, and then, as had been arranged and expected, Paul Formica, our Republican appropriations chairman, rose to offer an amendment which would be our budget in place of the Democratic budget. In other words, to amend the Democratic budget by replacing it with the Republican budget. And Paul spoke on it, Scott France, and our leaders, Kevin Witkos and Len Fisano. And at that point, you would expect that the Democratic leadership would stand up and make a case against it, and then there'd be an 18-18 vote, and the Lieutenant Governor would break the tie against us. Instead, Senator Paul Doyle from Wethersfield stood up, and Senator Doyle started to talk about his history in the Senate and his frustrations with the budgets that have been passed in recent years. And it became obvious as he spoke that he wasn't standing on his feet to oppose our budget, but in fact, by the time he finished his remarks, had said that he in fact planned to support the amendment which would make the Republican budget the budget. And he was followed by Senator Gail Schlossberg of Milford, and then finally by my friend Senator Joan Hartley from Waterbury. All three of them, I think, made a very thoughtful case under a great deal of pressure for why they'd reached this decision. And I could boil it down to a couple of things. One is that having supported tax increases in the past reluctantly, they just couldn't do it again because they realized it wasn't working. And also, I think all three of them spoke of the growth of fixed costs in the Connecticut state budget. Senator Hartley said fixed costs, which had been 36% of the budget just 10 years ago, are now over 50%. And by fixed costs, it means things that you just have to pay. In your household budget, you'd say your fixed costs are your mortgage and your car payments. You can't reduce them if you want to. In the state budget, it's debt service and employee costs that are contractual and things like that. So those have grown and grown, and as they said, it simply can't continue. And although they said the Republican budget is not perfect, and I would say the Republican budget is not perfect, they said it moves the state in the right direction instead of moving it in the wrong direction. So when I realized that those three Democrats had, I would say, the fortitude to stand with us under, I'm sure, severe pressure from their colleagues, I rather expected that Democratic leadership would recess rather than allow the vote to go forward. But they didn't. Instead, there was a vote first on the amendment, and by adopting the amendment, the Republican budget replaced the Democratic budget. And then there was a vote on the budget very shortly afterwards, both votes 21-15, with the 3 Democrats joining the 18 Republicans to pass the bill. And I'll say, as far as why the vote was allowed to go forward, the calculating side of me would say that it would look very bad having a majority in the chamber having come together to support a budget to shut down the process and not allow the vote to go forward politically. But I would also say that Senator Martin Looney, you may have heard me say that he's a man I respect. I also like to think that he cares enough for that chamber and the way that we do our business that he would have felt that that would not have been a fair thing to do. So the situation now is we have passed a budget. through the Senate. The first time a budget has been voted on in this entire process, a Republican budget, a budget that does not increase taxes, that does not make devastating cuts to social services, that maintains funding to municipalities, really that does just about as good a job under the circumstances as you can to keep government functioning without breaking the backs of taxpayers. It has passed the Senate. Now the pressure is on the Speaker of the House, Joe Markley, and it's up to him to call the House into session. But I think the pressure on him will be very great, because I will say this, I am confident that if this budget that we just passed in the Senate goes to the House, that it will pass the House as well, that there are enough Democrats in the House, we'd only need 4 to join the Republicans, and then we would have passed a budget solving this budget crisis and passed a Republican budget that maybe can start to solve our entire fiscal dilemma. So the argument that Joe Markley has been making for weeks is your only choice is between the Democratic budget and the governor's devastating rescissions. So if you're not voting for the budget, you're voting for the governor's awful rescissions. Now the fact is, your choice is between the Republican budget and the governor's devastating rescissions. And if Joe Markley doesn't allow a vote, he is the one that is making the rescissions go into place. They can argue that the governor will veto the budget. I would say it's irrelevant to whether you think it's the right document or not. Let's put it on his desk and see what he does. And frankly, as a man who has said he doesn't want to increase taxes, I don't know why he wouldn't embrace it, except for the fact that it comes from the wrong side of the aisle. We have seen today what certain members of our chamber are made of as statesmen and as people. And we will see over the next few days what the leadership in the House and the governor of this state is made of. Because we now have a budget that what people have been crying to us, do your job, we've done our job. Now it's up to Joe Markley and Dan Malloy to do their job. Incidentally, if you want to give them some encouragement, don't hesitate to make your voices heard. Anyways, a happy day. I don't often get to say that when I give these reports, but I'm pleased to tell you that we've made that much progress. Thank you for sticking with us, and thank you for your attention.